At this rate, it would be difficult. But, okay, other views. Okay, well then let's do this. Let's look at the feeding of the 5,000, and let's start out a little bit in the bread from heaven and then skip to the words of eternal life and see how we can tie those together. Because the difficult sayings that people are complaining about in the section on the words of eternal life are what Jesus just said about the bread of heaven. So let's start out and we say, remember, we're not going to pronounce the Greek out loud so much as look at it here, and we'll be doing English according to Yoda. So, but we're going to go through and look at things in detail, and we start out here, and it says, after these things. What things are these? The previous chapter, right. And so, where did the previous chapter end? Jesus talking to his disciples and saying, or talking to the Pharisees and saying, if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. We have that parallel with the road to Emmaus. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? And then we go after these things. So we have set up with these things what is going to be one of the miracles that we remember from Jesus' earthly ministry, recognizing as well that in John he doesn't talk about them being miracles. He talks about them being signs who point to who Jesus is. So after these things, but let's set that up, that this is the arc of the narrative here. Jesus has encountered opposition. He's talked about how the scripture points to who he is. And it's after these things now that we're going to get a key revelation both in sign and in word. So after these things went away Jesus over the Sea of Galilee of Tiberias. Was following now him a crowd great, because they were seeing the signs he was doing upon those being sick. So the healings that we would describe in the other Gospels as miraculous healings, John, of course, is referring here as signs. Went up now on the mountain Jesus. What mountain are we talking about? Does anybody have a study Bible that says what mountain we're talking about? Okay. Okay, we know we're near Galilee because we've crossed the Sea of Galilee. If we go back in the Gospel, we see that Jesus encounters the woman of Samaria in chapter 4. At the end of chapter 4, he departs from Samaria to Galilee. So to do that, he's just going to head straight north. So he's on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. He's in Galilee proper. And he then goes up to Jerusalem, where he disputes people around the temple because he has healed somebody at the gate near the sheep gate, or at the sheep gate. And there's a dispute, and there are witnesses and things of that sort. And now it says he goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So where are we now? Right, we're not in Galilee proper. We're to the east side of the Sea of Galilee in the Decapolis, an area that is going to be even less Jewish than Galilee proper. Remember in Mark, for example, what happens when Jesus gets to the east side of the Sea of Galilee and he's in the country of the Gerasenes. What is the occupation of the Gerasenes he encounters there? They're pig farmers. Big hint, we're not in Jewish territory, okay? So we are going out from opposition in Jerusalem into even more Gentile territory. And so the arc of the narrative is continuing, pointing towards a major sign that will take place as he's in Gentile territory here. So we're on a mountain in the Decapolis, otherwise unidentified, and there was sitting with him the disciples of him. So he's got his disciples. Was now near the Passover, the feast of the Jews. Remember, John's chronology is different from that of the Synoptic Gospels. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, everything happens in basically a year, right? How long does John's Gospel go? We go to 3 Passovers, right? And so it's like 2 to 3 years here. Having lifted up then the eyes, Jesus, and having seen that a great crowd is coming to him, he says to Philip, "From where shall we buy bread that might eat these?" What do we know about Philip so far? He has a Greek name. Later on, when we get to chapter 12, when Jesus says, "Now is my hour come," it's going to be after some Greeks want to see him at the temple. And they do so by approaching Philip, probably because he's the one with the Greek name. So he's probably safer to approach. So Jesus sees a great crowd and says to Philip, again, we're in even more Gentile territory now, "From where shall we buy bread that might eat these?" And just a little bit of etymology for you linguists. Phagosin here, from the verb phagao, when we refer to something being a phage in medical lingo. You know, it's from the Greek, phago, which means to eat. And so if let me make up a word here. Let's say I was a habitual eater of ice. What would I be called in medical terminology? A pagophagus. Phagus would be one who eats. And so this has nothing really to do with the gospel narrative, but you get these little Greek roots every now and then that leap out at you and can be fun. This now he was saying, testing him. He foreknew what he was about to do. Does Jesus test his disciples? Well, if we take this at face value, we'd say, he sort of sets up learning opportunities, right? Testing in this sense, we just have to be careful with the language because this is more like a Socratic method. You're looking for the answer by getting people to ask the right questions and use it as a teaching moment. Answered him Philip, 200 denarii worth of loaves not are sufficient for them, that each little piece one might receive. What's a denarius worth? A day's wage for a laborer. So 200 days' wages are not enough to do this. Says to him, one of the disciples of him, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, "Is a little boy here who has 5 loaves barley and 2 small fish?" So now we've got another disciple named Andrew. And Andrew is referred to in the Eastern Church as St. Andrew the First Called. Because if we go back to the very beginning of the gospel, when Andrew is next to the Jordan with John the Baptist, he's the one who Jesus says, "Come and see." And he goes and gets his brother Simon and says, "We think we found the one we've been waiting for." So he's the first called and also, in effect, the first evangelist, because he goes to his brother and tells him that we have found the Messiah. So Andrew plays a role, always, of somebody in John's narrative in particular who points things out to people and gives an opportunity for something to happen. Is a little boy here who has 5 loaves, barley, and 2 small fish. But these, what are for so many? Said Jesus, make the men to recline. Again, this has been translated as men, but it's the plural of the word for human beings, so we could say people. Make the men to recline. There was now grass much in the place. Now, go back. Well, he's gone up to a mountain, and we're in a mountainous region, but when we have the feeding of the 5,000 in Mark, for example, where is that set? He's in the wilderness, right? And the word used in Greek is eramon. And the word is otherwise used in the New Testament to refer to a wilderness as a deserted or dry place. And so in Mark, when Jesus looks upon the crowd that's followed him, the narrative says that he looks upon them and has pity for them or takes compassion for them because they are like sheep without a shepherd. And then he says, sit down, and they sit down on the green grass. So what we're supposed to do is say, I thought we were in the desert. What's with the green grass? Jesus then takes the loaves, blesses and breaks and feeds everybody, and basically enacts and makes real the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He sets a rich table before me. John is not as explicit here, but if we read the Gospels together, we're saying, he doesn't use the word eramon here. He's not talking about a dry place, but he's talking about green fields, and we're supposed to think of the other evangelists here a little bit when we read it now, knowing the other evangelists, and say, is this the 23rd Psalm? But we don't have a reference to a shepherd. It's not as explicit as in Mark, for example. But notice what happens. We get about the same number, right? 5,000. Now, question for you. When we say 5,000 men, notice here that we have Andres, which now we are talking about men, not people. Because in the other Gospels, when we talk about 5,000 and we're using anthropoi, it would be expected in a patriarchal society that you count the men, and if there are women and children there, you just don't count them, right? And so potentially you have more than 5,000 if there are people with the men. But let's just assume, let's take the low end of the range here, the numerical range, and say there are 5,000. And we're up in the Decapolis. We're not really near Jerusalem, but we'll use Jerusalem as a comparator. Does anybody know what the population of Jerusalem is at this point? Right, but what's the normal population of Jerusalem year-round? Smaller than that, maybe 100,000. And so if you were to take the just the capital city and say, well, you might have 5% of all the people out here as a comparator. Now, these aren't all from Jerusalem, obviously, but the point is this is a big crowd. This is not a densely populated area. And they've been following him. Took then the loaves, Jesus, and having given thanks, notice the word eucharistes, because we say Holy Eucharist is what? The great thanksgiving. Having given thanks, he distributed to those reclining, likewise also the fish, as much as they wished. When now they were filled, he says to the disciples of him, gather together the having been over and above, isn't that a great word? Having been over and above fragments. And that's, you'll notice how a Greek word is working there. you know how peri works in Greek, right? And so we have periseusanta. And when we get that anta sort of thing, we're starting to talk about all things, right? So having been over and above fragments, klasmata, so that nothing, anything, may be lost. They gathered together, therefore, and filled 12 handbaskets of fragments from the 5 loaves barley, which were over and above to those having eaten. No reference to the fish here, okay? Are we supposed to notice the number 12? They liked 12. Why do they like 12? Well, we've got the 12 tribes of Israel, right? We know that in the ancient Near East, with civilization really sort of arising between the Tigris and the Euphrates, how do the Sumerians count? Base 12. Because this is a number that is a multiple of 1, of 2, of 3, of 4, of 6. There are all kinds of ratios you can get in a dodeconic base here. And, you know, if you were just Joseph Campbell, historian of myth, you'd say, well, that's why we get 12 tribes. And it's just, but the 12 has a meaning that resonates in the ancient Near East here. And certainly for the readers, the Jewish readers of the gospel, they're going to sit there and say, 12 baskets, 12 tribes, what's going on here? The therefore people, having seen what he had done, the sign, there's that word again, were saying, this is truly the prophet who is coming into the world. What prophet are they referring to? Who's the prophet they're expecting? Elijah, right? What, you know, to this day, what do you do at your Seder supper? You leave an extra seat and an extra place setting for Elijah, and you leave the door for Elijah. Why? Elijah's supposed to show up at the end of the age. And so if people are saying this is truly the prophet, they're saying this is the end of the age. Something different is happening. There's an equation of the Messiah and the coming of Elijah. What does Jesus say when people ask him about Elijah? Exactly. He said, Elijah's already here. And starts talking about John the Baptist. The prophet has already shown up to tell you that the end of the age has come, and I am the end of the age, is what Jesus is doing there. And so if we were to be good foursquare gospel fundamentalists and do different dispensations, right? You've heard of dispensationalism, and so you've got the one in Eden, and then you've got the one of the fall, and then you've got the one of Israel. And at the end of the age here, we get a different dispensation of God's justice and mercy, and that's the coming of the Christ. You can find all kinds of literature out there on dispensationalism, and in our day and age, when we talk about fundamentalists, we tend to think of fundamentalism as old-time religion. But fundamentalism as we know it actually arises about 1910 to 1920. It's not that old. And in what we call fundamentalists, we can have premillennial or postmillennial dispensationalists. Because the dispensation is supposed to be that Jesus shows up at his second coming. And if you're a premillennial dispensationalist, you say there will be 1,000 years tribulation, and then Jesus will show up and the world will end. If you're a postmillennial dispensationalist, you say Jesus shows up at the second coming and there's 1,000 years of tribulation and then God rolls it all up. And you get debates between fundamentalist churches. I actually don't like the term fundamentalist. It's inaccurate. If you want to use a theologically accurate term to describe what we call fundamentalists in modern America, the better term would be inerrantists, which means those who say that Scripture is inerrant. that Scripture cannot lead you into any knowledge, any error, and is perfect. And there are arguments as to degrees of inerrancy there. But the prophet here they're waiting for is Elijah. So as soon as they're saying, is this the prophet? They're basically saying, is this the end of the age? Now, let's back up a minute. We are in what is called Second Temple Judaism. We had the first temple built by Solomon. It was destroyed by the Babylonians, right? The second temple has been built and has been around for a couple hundred years at this point. And this is a different awareness of being Jewish. People are waiting on the end of the age. That's why they're expecting a Messiah, because there has not been a unified monarchy. They've been under foreign oppression for a long time, right? It could be the Ptolemies, it could be the Romans, it could be whoever, but they're waiting for something to happen. Right after they ask that question, Jesus does what? Jesus, therefore, having known that they are about to come and to seize him, that they might make him king, withdrew again to the mountain himself alone. He's figured out. They're saying, is this the prophet? Let's put him in office. And that's not the way he's going to accomplish his mission, right? Okay, but let's pursue that thought. You said there's sometimes people want to throw him off a cliff, and there's sometimes people want to make him king. Now, let's pursue those two stories for a minute. The story you're referring to where people want to throw him off a cliff is in Luke's gospel. Where does that happen? No, that's going to be later in John when they seek to stone him for saying, before Abraham was, I am. When they try to throw him off the cliff in Luke's gospel, it's in his hometown. He's been in his own synagogue and said, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing, and then goes on to tell them about the widow of Zarephath and Naaman the Syrian, and has basically told people living in a mixed area where they're a little bit more ultranationalist that God is not sending his mercy just to the people of the covenant, but to all people, including those dirty foreigners. So the people who are trying to throw him off the cliff are different people from the ones on the other side of the lake who are more Gentile. They're the ones who want to make him king. The Jews amongst them are saying, is this the prophet? And you get kind of a crowd dynamic going here in a mixed crowd, saying, let's get on to something good here. What else do we know about Luke's account of Jesus in Nazareth? It says he could do no mighty work there. Why? Because of the people's unbelief. So now we get to another sign, right? We've just had the feeding of the 5,000, and we move on to walking on water. Actually, we're going fast enough. We'll just go through. When now evening it became, went down the disciples of him to the sea. And having entered into a boat, they were going over the sea to Capernaum. So we're heading west again. And dark already it had become, and not had come to them Jesus. Now notice the parallels here. Same thing happens in Mark. They're on the other side of the sea, and they get separated. Why? Because Jesus has withdrawn. And the sea by a wind strong blowing was agitated. That's a perfect Yoda sentence. And the sea by a wind strong blowing was agitated. Having rowed, therefore, about stadia 25 or 30, what's the length of a stadium? No, that's a modern stadium. What is a stadium in ancient measure? No, because that sea's not that wide. Huh? Yeah. It's 300 or 400 yards. And so if we sit there and say 30 stadia, and say that's 12,000 yards, how many yards are in a mile? 1,760, right? So 12,000, we're a little over 6 miles here. Call it 6 to 7 miles. That's a long way, right? You're going to get worn out, particularly with the wind going. They see Jesus walking on the sea and near the boat coming. And they were frightened. And he says to them, Ego eimi, I am. Not fear. Do we recognize the words I am? This is the holy name of God. So this is like coming up, and if we were to transliterate it and make it capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, we'd say, the holy name, not fear. This happens when he is in the midst of a rather important sign, walking on water, but immediately after the feeding of the 5,000 as well. We should tie these two together. Not fear. So the Lord God Almighty shows up, and what are the first words he says to his disciples when the Lord God Almighty shows up? Don't be afraid. Right? They were willing then to receive him into the boat, and immediately was the boat at the land to which they were going. Fast forward around the western shore. On the next day, the crowd standing on the other side of the sea, having seen that boat other, no one was there, if not one and that not went with. There's a good translation exercise for you on your Greek exam. The disciples of him, Jesus into the boat, but alone the disciples of him went away. We smoothed that out in the RSV a bit to say, people noticed that the boat left and Jesus wasn't with them, and so they do what? Other came boats from Tiberias, near the place where they ate the bread. Where's Tiberias in relation to the lake? Who's got a map in their Bible? Right, so what's the problem with the narrative? They were on the eastern shore, and it says near where they ate the bread, and Tiberias is on the western shore. So what do we do with that? Basically what we do with it is say the crowds followed him. And they've used some boats to get there as well. And the word is spread because people are coming from both shores now. Near the place where they ate the bread, having given thanks, the Lord. When therefore saw the crowd that Jesus not is there, nor the disciples of him, they entered into the boats. Okay, so now the narrative makes sense. They're over on the eastern shore where Jesus has fed the 5,000. Boats have come across the lake to find Jesus, and they find the crowd and find that Jesus isn't there. So the word is spread that they've gone across the lake to find him. And they sailed back across the lake to Capernaum. Now, if you put those details together, what we're seeing here, besides people trying to make Jesus king, is that the whole countryside is in an uproar. And they're following him around and searching for him, crisscrossing the lake. Word has spread on both sides of the lake, both of the healings and of the feeding of the 5,000. And people are now searching. Seeking Jesus, and having found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when here have you come? Fast forward now, not actually fast forward, but switch gears in the arc of the narrative into the next major sign that is going to be a major opportunity for teaching as well. And we get the bread of life. Answered them Jesus and said, Truly, truly, I say to you, You seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were satisfied. Now there's a little double entendre going on here, right? Because John's called the healings and the bread signs. But Jesus is saying it's not because you saw signs. What he's basically saying is you didn't read the signs. You just wanted the bread, but you didn't figure out what the signs were pointing to. Not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were satisfied. Work not for the food that is perishing, but for food enduring unto life eternal. And we get that zoein here for the type of life that is more than just biological existence. So nowadays we would call it everlasting life, spiritual life, the life that does not end, life eternal here. Actually, when we say eternal aionion, the literal translation of that would be of the ages. Because we have a worldview in the ancient world that there are successive ages that follow each other. And perhaps that language can go back to what we just had John write, that the people are saying, is this the prophet? In other words, is there a shift between ages coming about? Enduring unto life eternal, which the Son of Man to you will give. Now, we're familiar with that term from Mark in particular, less so from the other synoptic Gospels. But it's not a term that shows up much in John, right? The Son of Man. Is it? Jesus refers to himself as the Son frequently, refers to his Father frequently, but this is not Johannine language, the Son of Man. It's rare in John. Think of the setting, though. Jesus is talking to people who are buzzing around the lake, saying, is this the prophet? Trying to make him king. Is this the end of the age? And by referring to the Son of Man, he's referring them back to the prophetic literature. Because where do we get the Son of Man? In Daniel, right? And what does the vision of Daniel? I saw one like the Son of Man, right? After Daniel has seen the Ancient of Days. So Daniel has a vision of the Father, and Daniel has a vision of the Son. And there's some wonderful icons in the East of the Son of Man. And what does the Son of Man have coming out of his mouth? If you know your description from Daniel. A sword. Right. And so when Luke has Jesus saying, I have come not to bring peace, but to bring a sword, get a little echo of that. He's saying there will be divisions, but that sword is the sword that will establish truth. And this reference to the Son of Man is basically speaking to the apocalyptic, messianic expectancies of the crowd. Not because he's playing to the crowd, but because it's true. The Son of Man to you will give. Him for the Father has sealed. That's an interesting verb, right? Esfragisen. See if it shows up anywhere else here. If the computer will speed up a bit. Sfragizo. And so we see Matthew use it to set a seal on the tomb. And otherwise it doesn't appear in the Gospels. It's in the Pauline literature, and then it shows up again in Revelation. Not a common verb. Properly speaking here in Greek, to seal with a signet ring, to put your mark on something. And so if Jesus is sitting here saying, let's get back, the Father has sealed the Son, bear that in mind as we get on to his teaching now about the identity between the Son and the Father, right? The Father's in the Son is in the Father. Keep that verb in mind because John is setting up that teaching that's going to happen, has sealed God. They said therefore to him, "What must we do that we may be doing the works of God?" Now this is the question we all ask in church, right? What am I supposed to do? And we get a direct answer. Answered Jesus and said to them, "This is the work." This isn't a parable. This isn't, a little teaching moment like that. This is a direct answer. This is the work of God, that you should believe in him who has sent he. Right? You should believe in the Son. He's already referred to the Son of Man, has had God's seal set upon him, and the work of God is to believe in him. Now, what does he mean by believe? Believe his words? Believe in him as a person? Identify yourself with him? Not entirely elucidated yet, right? But we could say all of the above. Believe in him who has sent he. They said therefore to him, "What then do you as a sign, that we may see and believe you?" Okay, slightly different crowd now. There are those who've seen the feeding of the 5,000 and been fed. There are those the disciples, who've seen him walk on water. There are those who have seen him heal. But the country's buzzing enough that there's a mixed crowd around, and people are saying, "Okay, you just told us that the work of God is to believe in the one who he sent. So how are you going to prove who you are?" Again, you get these themes throughout the history of the church, right? We get lots of fellow travelers who sit there and say, "I'm seeking truth, I'm seeking God, I'm seeking. And what the church does that really ticks the world off is we don't say that we're seeking. We say we found. And people don't like that answer, and so the next question they ask the church is, prove that what you found is real. What work do you perform? From the get-go, this is the question asked that will be asked of the church throughout the centuries. They ask Jesus of it right after he's performed miracles. What work do you perform? The fathers of us the manna ate in the wilderness, as it is written, bread from heaven he gave them to eat. So they know their Bible, right? They're saying, when God shows up, here are the things that happen. Said therefore to them Jesus, "Truly, truly, I say to you, not Moses has given you the bread from heaven, but the Father of me." Ooh, alarm bells. This happened back in chapter 5. People got torqued off. Why? Because Jesus said, "the Father of me," right? So here we go again. "But the Father of me gives you the bread from heaven, true. For bread of God is the one coming down out of heaven and life-giving to the world." They said therefore to him, "Sir, owe us, give to us the bread this." Some echoes here of the Samaritan woman at the well. If you knew who you were talking to, he would give you the water of life. "Sir, give me this water that I may not come here." What happens then? The Samaritan woman goes into the town, and it says then that the Samaritans believe in Jesus. So we're getting echoes of that here, but we're going to see a different outcome in some cases. Said therefore to him, "Sir, owe us, give to us the bread this." Said to them Jesus, "Ego eimi, I am the bread of life." So here we get a direct pairing of a sign, the feeding of the 5,000, and an I am. So the sign is accompanied by the name. The sign and the holy name make it pretty clear who Jesus is being revealed to be. Next time you have somebody say, "Well, Jesus never claimed to be God," they haven't read John. Yes, Julie.
My Bible says that Jesus used the word "I am" over 20 times in this passage.
Yes, which is why people try to kill him with stones. But the important "I am" sayings always show up with a sign accompanying them. Here it is with the feeding of the 5,000 and the reference to the bread. I am the bread of life. The one coming to me never not shall hunger. Now, that's a double negative in English. What do we do with a double negative in Greek, those of you who studied Greek? It's an intensifier. And so this means really never, not possible, never, never. Not never, never land, but never, never, never not shall hunger. And the one believing in me. Now, again, notice this is a participial construction. Let's just do a little excursus on grammar, and then we're going to take a break right once we get to the end of this little section. How would you describe a participle in English? What is a participle? A verb with an ing. Okay. Basically, it is a verb of action and status. In other words, it combines being, a state of being, with what you do, how your state of being is enacted. And so if I say, sitting, I reach for the mouse, I am describing my state of being as part of the action. So believing here, and this works even more strongly in Greek than in English. So believing here is not just what we do, but how we enter a state of being that is reflected in what we do. Believing is a little bit stronger here in a participial construction than saying the one who believes. Yes, Julie.
What's the difference between believing and faith? It says without faith it's impossible to please God. So what's this?
Well, they're the same word in Greek. And so the underlying verb is pisteuo. This is the nominative masculine singular, but it's pisteuo is the participial, or I just gave you the nominative masculine singular. That's the participial verb. Pisteuo would be I believe. But we can also translate pisteuo as I have faith. The word for faith, the noun for faith, is pistis. And so, if we just wanted to be very, very literal in word construction, taking pistis as the root here, we would say the one having faith rather than the one believing. And you can find translations that would say that. What does the RSV do? What verse are we on here? 35. Wait a minute. I'm in the wrong chapter. Okay. 35. Yeah, the RSV says, he who believes. And so that's actually slightly less direct than the Greek. Slightly less a state of being. He who believes, it makes it a little bit more about my will and less about the combination of my will with who I am. So I prefer the Greek here. The one believing in me, no, not shall thirst any time. So shall not hunger, shall not thirst at any time. That's an echo back to the living water with the Samaritan woman at the well. But I said to you that also you have seen me and yet not believe. All that gives me the Father to me will come, and the one coming to me, no, not shall I cast out. So now he's setting it up that those who believe have been given to him by whom? The Father. What do we call this in theology? We've got a master's in theology in the back. Go for it. All right. Prevenient grace. Preveniens, that which goes before. And so it's good classical theology that you cannot believe in God unless you have received the grace of the Holy Spirit to believe in God. So Jesus is saying that those who believe have been given to him by the Father. He hasn't named the Spirit yet in terms of a person who is active here, but will come, and the one coming to me, not shall I cast out. never, but really never, to paraphrase Gilbert and Sullivan in the opposite way. For I have come down from heaven, not that I should do the will of me, but the will of the one having sent me. This now is the will of the one having sent me, that all that he has given me, none I should lose of it, of that all, but will raise up it in the last day. Okay, we're getting a pretty good signal there that there is a shift in the age going on here. I will raise up in the last day. This for is the will of the Father of me, that everyone beholding the Son and believing in him should have life eternal, and I will raise up him, I, in the last day. Now you see why it's popular to give John to people when you're trying to instruct them in the faith. Because you get all these big theological statements where it's like, oh, here's how it works. But Jesus has already said to the crowd what? If we go all the way back here, let me find it again. There's some of you that have seen me and yet not believe. And then he goes on to say, all who the Father gives me believe, and I will raise up at the last day. This for is the will of the Father of me, that everyone beholding the Son and believing in him should have life eternal, and I will raise him up in the last day. So beholding, everybody can behold, right? But beholding and believing, we have to do something about it. There's a response model here that becomes even more important in John, because John, unlike the other evangelists, deals a lot more in what's called realized eschatology. Now, what's the word eschaton, you Greek students? Last thing, right? So eschatology is the theology of last things, of the end of the age, of, when everything gets wrapped up. And so we have the last day here. It's getting pretty, and it says eschate hemera, so we get the same root. We have to opt in. Salvation is offered to all. Some people decide they had a better idea and say no. We have to trust in prevenient grace, but some people, even with prevenient grace, will sit there and say, thank you. No. Himera? Himera down here, day, yeah. No, that was a coined word. Let's take a break. It's 10 till 8. We'll take a 5-minute break. And there are sugar cookies.
just hit it on here. I just thought I'd pull it up. Because it's not deserty. That's a traditional place.
Okay, it's not deserty, so it's not Mark's story.
Well, also, Mark's story is traditionally in the same place.
So what do we do with the words everywhere? Maybe different climate?
Well, no, it's near the Golan Heights. It's near the lake. It's lush there. But I'm not finding.
Well, it says he goes back up the mountain, so he's not doing the multiplication type on top of the mountain, somewhere lower.
That's not it. They want Mao. That's Wailing Wall. Tabor, is that what it's called?
I would say not Tabor.
No, Mount. Here we go. I'm not in Google that way.
Okay. The lightning tour of chapter 6. What did you say? Well, we decided to just blast through. Seemed to be the consensus. So. We're grumbling, therefore, the Jews about him, because he said, I am the bread having come down from heaven. It seems to me grumbling isn't a strong enough word here. Using the holy name is quite a blasphemy, right? And so we're grumbling about him because he said, I am the bread having come down from heaven. Well, let's check. Let's see where else it shows up in a concordance, maybe. Let's try that. Why are these computers slow tonight? They grumbled. An onomatopoeic term. Gogutso, to murmur, imitating the sound of the cooing of doves. I don't think it's quite that peaceful. But we're grumbling therefore the Jews about him because he said, I am the bread having come down from heaven. And they were saying, not this is Jesus, the son of Joseph? He's back on the west side of the lake. Nazareth is not far from here. There are people in the crowd who know who he is. Some of his homeboys are around. Not this is Jesus, the son of Joseph, of whom we know the father and the mother? How then says he, from heaven I have come down? Answered Jesus and said to them, not grumble with one another. No one is able to come to me if not the Father, the one having sent me, draws him, and I will raise him up in the last day. That's the third time now he said, I will raise him up in the last day. And it's the third time now that he said, those who believe are those who are given to me by the Father. It is written in the prophets, and they will be all taught of God. Everyone, having heard from the Father and having learned, comes to me. Not that the Father has seen anyone, if not the one being from God. What does that mean? Right. And we smooth that out in English and make it, not that anyone has seen the Father except him who is from God. Yeah, you got to play with this one, okay? He has seen the Father. Truly, truly, I say to you, the one believing has life eternal. Okay, that's that realized eschatology. It's not that we shall be saved, but that we are saved. In the Synoptic Gospels, there's more of a conception that, there's the end of the age and then we're all saved. In John, it's a present state of being, which is why you find John very popular in evangelism, because it's, you can ask people the question, then, are you saved, right? Which translates as, are you the one believing in the one whom the Father has said? Here we get ego eimi again. I am the bread of life. The fathers of you ate in the wilderness the manna and died. This is the bread from heaven coming down, that anyone of it may eat and not die. Anyone now. He's made this quite inclusive. I am the bread living from heaven, having come down. He's repeated it, who he is. If anyone shall have eaten of this bread, he will live to the age. And the bread also that I will give, the flesh of me, is for the of the world life. Now, notice the ongoing repetition here. The will of the Father, who I am. The will of the Father, who I am. I am the bread, I am the bread. I will give eternal life, I will give eternal life. And now we get a switch. That the bread is my flesh. And we're going to see the reaction. We're arguing therefore one another, the Jews, saying, how is able this man to give the flesh of him to eat? A not unreasonable question, right? You're sitting there and saying, I am the bread, my flesh is the bread. Okay, what is he talking about here? So, if we say it's a not unreasonable question, and combine that realization with Jesus saying, the one believing is the one given to me by the Father, what we have to at least entertain as a possibility here is that reason and cognition are not going to bring about faith. Now, reason and cognition are not going to contradict faith in classical theology, but we can't figure out God's will. It has to be revealed to us. Julie.
Isn't it because he's speaking spiritually and they're speaking physically? And, to eat of something would be consumed. I don't believe, take a meaning what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, there are layers of narrative here. There's the literal and there's the figurative and there's the spiritual, and there are some different layers here. The point I'm trying to make is that he switched gears here. And we have to relate this back a little bit to the fact that he's saying, the one believing is the one given to me, and that you aren't going to figure this out. This has to be revealed to you. Reason is not going to disprove faith, but reason is only going to take us a small percentage of the way towards faith. Reason is going to allow us to observe the world and say, there seems to be an order that points toward the existence of a creator. But that's not going to reveal to us that the Creator cares about us and will give us his Son as a ransom for our own fallenness. That has to be revealed. And so Jesus is now talking more about revelation, while the crowd is still trying to figure out what's happening. Said therefore to them Jesus, truly, truly, I say to you, if not you shall have eaten the flesh of the Son of Man, and shall have drunk of him the blood, not you have life in yourselves. Now, is he talking about, I will give you eternal life and raise you up at the last day? Or you don't presently have life in yourselves? We have here a verb switch to the present indicative active in Greek. Present is the same as in English, present tense, now. Indicative is the mood in Greek that indicates what? Reality. This is not a subjunctive voice or anything else. Active means that you are participating in this. So not you have life in yourselves. This is, again, John, with a little of that realized eschatology. You're believing, and you therefore eat of the bread and drink of the blood, believing that this is the one whom God sent. And that is how you are living into the life that you have, the salvation that you have. It's not future tense. The one eating of me the flesh and drinking of me the blood has, again, present indicative active, life eternal, and I will raise him up in the last day. More repetition. Right, because even if the kingdom of heaven is breaking into this world now, and we experience salvation now, it's still not the end of the age. Now, this is where N.T. Wright is going to run with us a lot in a book called For All the Saints, where he basically carefully parses, not just John, but a lot of biblical language, and says, when we talk about somebody's died and we say, well, he's in heaven now or something like that, that's actually not biblical. The biblical narrative says that we are raised to judgment, to heaven or hell, at the second coming of Christ, not just now. Now, on the other hand, once we die, we pass from time to eternity. And eternity is, by definition, timeless. And so we can't discount the intersection of time and eternity to say that when I die, I experience that judgment. But biblically, we're saying that the judgment to blessedness or damnation happens at the second coming. This is why we get the famous painting in the Sistine Chapel of the dead rising from their graves. It's not just you die and go to heaven or you die and go to hell. Or those of us that have lots of time, reserved for us in purgatory, that's a different thing. Now, but let's play with that a minute. Regardless of whether you believe in the doctrine of purgatory or not.
It fits that
Yeah.
situation where you're not raised until the second coming.
Right. Regardless of whether you believe in that doctrine or not, if you go and you, say, read the Divine Comedy by Dante, there are things that happen in hell, there are things that happen in heaven, but the only place where people are in a hurry and doing anything is in purgatory, because purgatory is bound by time. And so in good scholastic theology, at the second coming of Jesus, what happens to purgatory? Goes away. And so people are in a hurry to get through purgatory to the next stage up the mountain so they can enter eternity in the blessed kingdom. So again, we've got these little hints of realized eschatology here in what the verbs are doing. I will raise him up in the last day. The for flesh of me true is food, and the blood of me true is drink. The one eating of me the flesh and drinking of me the blood in me abides, and I in him. Mene is also to remain. To abide is our older way of saying it, but there's an identification. And again, notice that it's present, indicative, active. This is something that happens now. This is why we say, and Paul will run with this, that we are in Christ, that we incarnate Jesus' body in the church. As sent me the living Father, and I live because of the Father, also the one feeding on me, he also will live because of me. So we're participating in God's life. This is the bread from heaven having come down, not as ate the fathers and died. The one eating this bread will live to the age. Iona. Now, that again is another way of saying in Greek, eternally. To the ages of ages is one of the ways we used to say things in English. Okay, now we're told where he is. We've had hints all along where he is on the west side of the lake, and now it says, these things he said in the synagogue, teaching in Capernaum. So now we know where he is. Except having come across the lake, he's actually gone north, because he's on the northwest corner of the lake here, a lot closer to Nazareth, which is why some of his homeboys are around. And what's the reaction? Many, therefore, having heard of the disciples of him, said, difficult is the word this. Now notice that John refers to them, even those who go away, as the disciples. These are not just the named disciples, not just those who, because we get in Matthew and Luke, we get naming, right? Do we get that in John? No, we get names mentioned. We get Nathaniel and Andrew and Simon, Peter and Philip, but we don't ever get a list of the disciples in John. And we know from the Acts of the Apostles, when Matthias is selected to replace Judas, that we're told that he is from the company of those who have accompanied Jesus from the beginning. So there are other people beside the named disciples walking along with Jesus throughout all this. And John is saying, and some of them leave. Why? Difficult, the word this. Who is able to hear? Again, can we figure it out, or does it have to be revealed to us? We're going to see this constant theme. Knowing, however, Jesus in himself that are grumbling about this, the disciples of him, he said to them, this you does offend? Skandalitse. Now, this is from skandalon, which is, as a noun, what is skandalon in Greek? Well, what's the noun? Skandalon. A stumbling block, what you trip over. To scandalize somebody is to make them trip over something. And so, And I made the bad mistake in a chancery court in Harrison County, Mississippi in 1984 to refer to the essential scandalon of the plaintiff's argument and have a chancellor say, what? What kind of word is that? You just scored points. Didn't win that case. That made you a communist, right? Communist. You wore them bow ties, So this you does offend. Now, again, skandalice, that's a weak translation, offend. This makes you fall down, makes you stumble, causes you to stumble. This is what Jesus says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, right? This is strong language. So saying offend is, I think, a wimpy translation. But, and again, Paul will use it in talking about how we're supposed to live together in community. But the other usages in Jesus' mouth are all in Matthew, and they're much stronger in Matthew. What if then you should see the Son of Man ascending where he was before? Some of the people he's talking to are going to see that, right? At the ascension. So we're talking again about the revelation of truth here, not the discovery of truth. The Spirit it is. Oh, now we're mentioning the Spirit. Okay, here we go. The Spirit it is, giving life. The flesh not profits nothing. The words that I speak to you, Spirit are. Double entendre there. And the life they are. Equation of spirit and life. Another Johannine theme we're going to get. But they are of you some who not believe. This is right after he said 3 times that those who believe are those who the Father has given him, right? Knew from the beginning Jesus who are those not believing, and who it is who will betray him. And he was saying, because of this have I said to you, that no one is able to come to me, if not it shall have been granted to him from the Father. That's where prevenient faith comes from, folks. It is God's will to save all. But some say no. Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, we get Peter's confession of faith when? Where in the narrative does it happen? You are the Christ, right? But that happens when in the narrative? Before the transfiguration, right? So Peter says, that people are walking along and they say, who do you say who I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. And Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. No one comes to me except those given to me by the Father. And Peter goes on and then says, that bit about going to Jerusalem and getting killed, bad idea. And Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. Why? Because your thoughts are those of men. In other words, you're trying to figure this out. Bingo, we're right back here. You're trying to figure this out. And it has to be revealed. So, we can develop that thought. That's an incomplete description of faith, but let's go on for now. From that time, many out of the disciples of him departed to the back and no longer with him walked. They went home. A lot of them went home. They're like, okay, we thought this was the guy. We thought he was going to lead us into truth and teach us and maybe go and kick the Romans out and be our new king and also provide us with bread and heal us. But now he's talking about he's the bread of heaven and we have to eat his flesh and how it all works. And It's not computing here. It's not computing cognitively. Said therefore Jesus to the 12. Oh, now we get the 12 in John, right? Not also you are wishing to go away? Answered him Simon Peter, Lord, to whom will we go? Now, again, go back to the Synoptic Gospels. Get thee behind me, Satan, and then what happens? The transfiguration. So people have been talking, Jesus has done some teaching, there's been a rebuke. Then they go up to the mountain, and the Father says, after Jesus has been revealed in his glory, this is my Son, listen to him. So we don't get that in John. We get more teaching. Lord, to whom will we go? The words of life eternal you have, and we have believed and have known that you are the Holy One of God. Answered them Jesus, not I you the 12 did choose, and of you one a devil is. He was speaking now of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. He for was about to betray him, one of the 12. Segue to the next chapter. We're going to get a narrative change here, because there's going to be further problems. Who's going to show up next and really not believe in what Jesus is doing? His brothers. Right? Now he's got to go back to Judea. People are trying to make this a good human plan. What do his brothers say to him? You're going to go to Judea? They were just trying to kill you there. What are you, nuts? It's just like Peter saying, far be it from you, Lord, that this should happen to you, when he says, get thee behind me, Satan. People keep trying to figure this out so that they can both figure it out and participate in it with some level of control. And if we're relying on revelation here rather than knowledge, we're not going to have control. Now, somewhere in Paul's letters, somebody can find this for me if you want to pull out your sword drill, Paul says that knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. It sounds very Corinthian, but find me the verse, right? Sounds like part of an argument from, I think, 2 Corinthians, but love builds up, knowledge puffs up, right? Once we're trying to figure it out, there's an element of control involved that we're always seeking. Because I might have more knowledge than you, or you might have more knowledge than me, and maybe we can, cut a deal. Some of us might have secret knowledge. What do we call that? The oldest real enemy of the church. And it's running wild in the 21st century. Gnosis, Gnosticism, the idea that there's some hidden knowledge that you have to be initiated into, right? What does Jesus say about knowledge? Nothing is hidden that shall not be made plain. But from the get-go, we've basically always been fighting Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is alive and well and ascendant in the culture and in many churches. So, 1 Corinthians 8:1. Okay. Well, her phone did it. She didn't do her sword drill back.
I'm using all of my tools.
Okay. All right.
Go back to verse 69. And that word.
Where?
The Episcopal.
Episteukamen. It's a perfect indicative active of pisteuo. First person plural. Perfect indicative active. Because they're using P for present.
I needed a refresher on that.
Yeah. Oh, remember with the K, you sometimes get an augment, but you always look for that kappa and you're signaling a perfect there. Pepisteukamen from pisteuo. Right, it's a reduplication, it's an augment. So the root there is pisteuo. Yeah. So, yeah. You remembered Greek grammar. It's brownie points. Well, on that basis, you can close us in prayer. Amen. Real quick about next week. It's chapter 7, and that will be, 20 verses or so shorter. So we'll just plan on going through chapter 7 and maybe dwelling a little bit more on some of the content there. Now, who wants to volunteer to pray us out of here next week? That way you'll have a week to worry about it, and you won't get surprised. Well, I'm giving people the option to volunteer. Otherwise, I'll pick a volunteer. All right, if you want to pray next week, let me know. All right.